So when did love become a requirement for marriage? For the Roman Catholic Church, not until the 20th century Second Vatican Council. In fact, what people call the biblical definition of traditional marriage is not, as we've already seen, rooted in biblical text, but really only about 300 years old. The definition of marriage has always been evolving, from an understanding of marriage along the lines of property rights, to marriage as a means for procreation, to family-dominated arrangements designed to protect wealth, to more recently as a response to attraction, love, and mutual respect. But what actually has been traditional and biblical has been Christianity's response to divorce. And it is from that entry point that the Christian church would eventually get involved in marital law and then assimilate the civil institution of matrimony into its own sacrament today. During biblical times, marriage was more than just a contract between two people. It merged families, tribes, villages, societies, cultures, and economic holdings. But the primary goal of any couple wedding was, of course, procreation. Because of the necessity of social stability, of the partnership, and securing a proper place to raise children, Jewish and Christian authorities have always defended the sanctity and permanence of marriage, maintaining that divorce was to be avoided at all cost. When Jesus was asked about divorce and remarriage in Matthew 19, he was being tested to respond to Deuteronomy 24, where the law permits divorce. Jesus alludes to Genesis. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. For Jesus, the Deuteronomy allowance is a concession to the more perfect demand of permanence outlined by God. God commands permanence. Moses allowed divorce. Although this passage has also been used as an additional clobber verse against homosexuality by emphasizing that even Jesus refers to a man and woman getting married, one must note that the context is about divorce during Jesus' time. Same-sex marriage didn't exist in Jewish culture. So just because he doesn't mention something that his community has never experienced does not indicate a condemnation on equal marriage. This emphasis here is on the permanence of marriage, not on the gender of the couple. Jesus looks upon a married couple as no longer two, but one flesh. This indicates that he believes marriage is a blood relationship rather than a legal one. And as a blood relationship, like the relationship to father and mother, marriage cannot be dissolved. And just as God determines who one's parents are, so too it is God who joins together in marriage. Jesus then raises the possibility about being eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of God. Celibacy is an eschatological value, which within 200 years becomes the primary platform for the Christian church's position on sexual morality for centuries to come. But note that here it's just a recommendation, not a command. Now we're going to look at this passage more closely when we actually talk about transgender Christians in the future, so stay tuned for that. But before moving on, it's important to note that the next pericope is about Jesus blessing the children. After this squabble about divorce and remarriage, one needs to ask the question, what about the children? What will happen to them when one divorces and remarries? Because when one unit becomes scattered, a challenge to family ties and feuding often results. As the church expanded throughout the empire, early Christians questioned the Roman practices of divorce and infidelity, but had no role in wedding ceremonies or marital law. Upon the legalization of Christianity within the Roman Empire in the 4th century, newly married couples would often choose to go to their local bishop to receive a blessing on their union. This wasn't done on their wedding day, but sometimes weeks, months, or even years later. In no way was this required, but something the couples wanted to do. They wanted the church and, in effect, God's approval and protection on this marital bond. Now, this is important because the church wasn't involved in marriages until its members asked them to be involved. During the collapse of the Roman Empire during the Dark Ages, there was no government to enforce marital law, and so many scumbags ditched their wives and kids without any type of formal repercussion. As the only stable institution at the time, the Catholic Church stepped in, stepped up, and became actively involved in protecting marriages, marital law, and rituals. Since the government wasn't doing it, the church found it appropriate to assume this role to protect the wives, the families, and society. For the Catholic Church, this was a charitable act, considering they would have preferred that everyone just remain celibate. But nevertheless, in the 13th century, the Catholic Church elevated marriage to the status of sacrament. That is, a visible manifestation of God's active presence in the world today. For Catholics, the 7 sacraments were prefigured by Christ to reflect his ongoing ministry. Of course, theologically, this move by the church is a bit surprising since Jesus himself never got married. Yet church officials point to the covenantal relationship between Christ and his church and Jesus' virtues of fidelity and love and sacrifice for justification that marriage is something sacred or godly. In the 16th century, the Council of Trent declared that marriages may only take place in the presence of a priest. And with that, the church had decreed its stamp was needed to seal a marriage. And that because of its sacred nature, this pact could not be broken or abridged. This idea was reaffirmed in the late 19th century by Pope Leo XIII, who explained that marriages conducted by the state could never be the source of any fruitful benefit to the individual or the public, and that such civil marriage would only bring calamity and great evil. So that's how the church got involved. But again, when did love enter the picture? Throughout the centuries, Catholic teaching had stressed the contractual element of marriage. It bound a woman to a man, giving them exclusive right to sexual intimacy with each other for the divinely sanctioned purpose of procreation. If one of the partners was physically unable or unwilling to reproduce, the church would not marry them. 1960s Vatican II met a generation of people who wanted to marry someone they actually wanted to be with, someone who they loved. People wanted more from the institution of marriage, and the church responded to their demand by setting aside that legal term contract with the more theological word covenant, the continual call for marriages to recommit and nurture a relationship rather than simply to pledge. And this is where matrimony stands today in the Catholic tradition. In order to be married within the church, there must be a commitment to be unitive and procreative. The couple must express a mutual love and have an openness to children. This entire history of the Catholic Church's gradual involvement into matrimony underscores the Church's historical willingness to listen to the voices of the faithful and respond by amending matters of dogma and practice. The institution of marriage existed as a cultural construct long before Christianity was even a thing. The people acted first, and the church responded. When the early Christian newlyweds first sought the bishop's blessing, they were seeking support for something they were already doing. They were asking for a blessing, not permission. But as the church took over the institution, its theology became the gatekeeper of it, designating who was and who was not allowed to marry in society. As we discussed in a different lesson, the biblical view of marriage forbids intermarriage, that is, marrying someone of a different faith. But now it's common practice. As we've seen, the biblical view of marriage forbids divorce and remarriage, as we talked about that earlier today, a prohibition even endorsed by Jesus. But today, again, it's common practice. In the past 2 decades, we've seen a greater number of Christian churches officiating in same-sex weddings, which goes to show that some churches are still listening to the voices of the faithful. Queer couples have the capacity to be just as unitive and procreative as non-queer couples. Procreation is not limited to genital compatibility. And openness to children can exist in a variety of ways. Foster care, adoption, surrogacy, or just being gay uncles. Who said that procreation even needs to be limited to making babies? Helping your neighbor, doing social justice, producing art, bettering society are all forms of procreation. And the queers are awesome at it! Love expands, love inspires, love creates. And just because it's not a penis in a vagina doesn't mean that Christ is not present in the family. In fact, a penis in a vagina did not even make Jesus when he was born on this earth. It's when 2 or more are present, Christ is there also. Because where there is love, there is God.